Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today, we'll be discussing the cases of 3 young women, all killed in the same area of New York, all within 1 year of each other. The similarities in these cases can't be overlooked, and due to the circumstances, a possible connection to a prolific serial killer active in that area during the same time can't be discounted. Today's episode is about the murders of Mary Beth Heinz, Laverne Moye, and Dorothy Anderson. All right, so before we dive into today's case, I wanted to first let you know that during my research for this episode, I was unable to find very much information out there about Mary Beth Heinz's murder from May of 1972. And there are also 2 other potentially connected murders from the same time frame and area that we'll dive into a little bit in this episode as well. But again, those 2 cases were not covered extensively at all, and honestly, there's hardly any information out there on their cases in general. If I could cover every murder or missing persons case out there, I would, but it gets to be particularly difficult when there's a lack of source material for me to use. But Mary Beth's case was one that I'd come across on numerous occasions anytime I was trying to find a new case to look into, and for one reason or another, I would always put it on the back burner and dive into something else, but I've been determined to cover her case, so here we are. Now, as we get even further into things in this episode, I'll tell you right off the bat, there could be a connection to a serial killer. I'm not going to give any spoilers up front, but I will say this was probably the most in-depth research I've done thus far on a known serial killer for this podcast. And if you know me, you know I don't do that often.
I was going to say it's something that you usually try to distance yourself from. So
Yep.
There must be something that drew you to this possible connection to these murders for you to actually decide to dive into it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's get into it. Mary Elizabeth Heinz, who went by Mary Beth, was born on January 5th, 1951, and grew up in Mineola, New York, on Long Island, with her parents and 6 siblings. When Mary Beth was a young girl, she was diagnosed with epilepsy and struggled with grand mal seizures nearly every day of her life. Based on the Project Cold Case write-up on this case written by Kylie Kidd, Mary Beth was unable to drive, and she needed to have someone with her pretty much anywhere she went because she really couldn't be alone. And ideally, whoever was with her should have had some knowledge of what she was struggling with so they could help her through any seizures she may have had. She also took a medication regularly to try and keep her seizures under control. And before we keep going, I do just want to give a huge shout out to Project Cold Case for their write-up on Mary Beth's murder, because this source had probably the most amount of info on who Mary Beth was, details about her family, as well as her murder that I could find anywhere online. Honestly, without this source and maybe 1 or 2 other articles written in recent years, I likely wouldn't have been able to cover her case. There were just so many details lacking in reporting on what happened to her. But back to Mary Beth and her struggles with her epilepsy. Of course, as a young girl growing up in the 70s, and honestly it would probably be the same today, other kids weren't as accepting of her diagnosis as you would hope. According to Tommy, one of her brothers, quote, "She had one in her classroom and kids took it as a joke. She was bullied for that." End quote. And him saying she had one meant that she had a seizure in class. But her epilepsy seemed like something that Mary Beth didn't necessarily overcome in her older years, but she was definitely not letting it have full control over her life. That's at least how I've interpreted it. For example, there's a comment one of Mary Beth's sisters made to the reporter for a piece in the Mineola American about her sister, what she was like, things she loved, and also how she dealt with her seizures, and I wanted to read it for you. It states, quote, "Mary Beth was a super sweet person with a huge, kind heart. She loved all the underdogs, children and animals. She always had pet turtles at our summer home in the Poconos and spent endless hours babysitting other people's children. She always did her hair just perfect and wore matching outfits right down to the jewelry. Although she was often shy, I think it was because she knew she was different, and that was much harder then than it is now. She never knew when she was going to have a seizure or how those around her were going to respond. I like to think she thought, dang, if I'm going to have a seizure, I'm going to look good." End quote.
That's an interesting way to think about
I
it.
loved it. I thought that was like the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And you can even tell, like, looking at photos of her, she looks very put together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's got her hair perfectly done. You could tell, even though the photos are black and white, she, likely had her outfit perfectly picked out, matching. So I just thought it was a good way to describe her.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a poor way to think about things, but society is what society is. And if you had somebody having a seizure that wasn't well kept,
Yep.
maybe people would be less likely to help or would think lowly of them versus this well put together young lady having a seizure. Like she said, if I'm going to have a seizure, I'm going to look good doing it.
Yeah.
People would probably be more willing to help her or not be as judgmental.
Yeah, which is sad to think about, but it is true and just how people are.
Right, in society in general.
Yeah. Now, as Mary Beth got older, she attended Mineola High School, and after she graduated from there, she landed a job as a live-in nanny in a town called Belmore, which was only about 11 miles or a 20-minute drive away from her home on Long Island. And I'm sure you're curious, and I don't want to just gloss over her epilepsy when it came to this new job, but I don't know exactly how Mary Beth handled this aspect of her life when it came to work. I can only assume that maybe her medication was keeping her seizures more under control, or possibly someone in the family she was nannying for was able to help her in case she had a seizure. I'm not 100% positive on this, though, because her job and this aspect of her life really hasn't been reported on in great detail, so this is just an educated guess on my part. But either way, it was also stated that Mary Beth didn't live with the family she was nannying for full time. She spent Monday through Friday in Belmore with this family, and then on Friday evenings, she would take the bus home from Belmore to Mineola to spend Saturdays and Sundays at home with her family.
Right, because it's important to remember that she couldn't drive on her own because of her condition.
Correct, yes, so that's why she was taking the bus.
Right.
So Mary Beth's plans for Friday, May 5th, 1972 were almost no different than what she did every Friday. As usual, it was her last day caring for the children in Belmore, and later that evening, she'd hop on a bus to head back home. However, her plans for after she arrived back to Mineola were a little bit different for that night. You see, apparently there was a dance going on locally, and the only way I've seen it described is as an epilepsy dance, so I can only assume it was probably for people in the area who were a part of that community. And from all accounts, Mary Beth was super excited for the dance and was in a particularly enthusiastic mood that day. Now, unfortunately, due to the lack of coverage on this case, I don't know a lot of specifics on what took place next, outside of a few details. But the exact dates and times of when those things happened are just really murky. But generally speaking, here's what I know. Sometime in the early evening, Mary Beth was supposed to arrive home from the bus station and meet up with her date for the dance at her house, and then they would head over to wherever the dance was taking place together. But Mary Beth never came home that night. And according to the Project Cold Case write-up, her date and his mother had gotten to the Heinz family home sometime that night, and they waited for a little while for Mary Beth to arrive, but she just never did, which was obviously completely out of character for her. She would never just not come home, and we can't forget about her struggles with her epilepsy in this whole situation as well. She was pretty much never left alone, yet now she's nowhere to be found. I mean, I can see why everyone would be worried. And on top of that, you have to think she was in a great mood and she's excited for this dance. Her ditching it totally didn't make sense.
Right, I'm just imagining you had this young girl that loved getting dolled up on the regular.
Right, yeah.
So now you have a dance that specifically caters towards her and people like her that suffer from epilepsy. It's not something that she's going to miss.
No, of course not.
She's probably so excited about this.
She was probably itching to get on that bus after the day babysitting the kids, to get home and get all dolled up and go to this dance.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Just another instance of a case where there's no way that this person would have ran away.
Yes.
And was like trying to leave their life. Like this is a problem from the get-go that she didn't return from the bus.
Yes, it's very obvious that she wouldn't have done this. Now, I believe the following day, Saturday, May 6th, Mary Beth's parents did attempt to report her missing. And like so many cases we discuss, the Nassau County Police Department gave the Heinz family the same response that authorities give many parents of adult children that are missing. Because Mary Beth was 21 years old at this point, they gave the old, "Oh, she's an adult, she can do what she wants, we really can't report her missing" excuse.
Right, but she suffers from some type of ailment where she doesn't live alone. She, in some respect, depends on other people to be there to help her.
Absolutely.
It's not your typical, oh, it's an adult child.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about this all the time, especially in cases like this where police are not ready to begin the investigation when they should. They kind of push it off to the side.
Yes.
You have to take into account the family's feelings on something. And if they're giving you this information, it needs to be factored into your decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just tough too, because I feel like a lot of the cases we've covered over the past couple months have been from like late 80s, early 90s. This is 72. This is 50 years ago.
Yeah,
so I feel like you had even more in your head that whole, they probably just ran off.
Push it off to the side. I mean, 70s, 80s, 90s, as you get to 90s into 2000s, it's more like, okay, police are ready to get going.
Yeah.
And this isn't like a blanket statement for all agencies, because we've had other cases that happened in those time periods.
Debbie Makel is one that always comes into my head. Pennsylvania, 1973.
Right, and they're ready to go right off the bat.
Yeah. But then you have to also think, so it's different with Debbie Makel's case because she was a little girl compared to an adult woman.
Adult.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think that's where you see that big difference in cases, at least from the 70s. That's what I've noticed anyway. But So based on everything we know about Mary Beth so far, it's not something she would do, and the fear that her family felt for her safety was overwhelming. Then, by Monday, May 8th, it appears as though Mary Beth, who was described as a 5 foot 4 inches tall white woman who was 130 pounds with blonde hair, was officially reported as missing. But I really don't know what prompted that, whether it was additional pushing from the family or some other reason altogether.
Well, I mean, even though somebody is an adult, it doesn't mean that you can't report them missing.
Of course not. Like, how can they just say to you, like, no, we're not going to put in a report?
Right. It's like if you didn't show up at home after you went out for groceries, I can report you missing.
Exactly.
So I think it's also, it's probably pressure from the family to report her missing, but also it gets to a point where you can't keep pushing it off.
Exactly.
You have to do what's right.
Yeah. But then 2 days later, on Wednesday, May 10th, 1972, which was now 5 days after she'd been last seen, Mary Beth Heinz's body would be found. Her body was discovered lying face down with her head submerged in a stream or creek. It's been described both ways, but it was right along Hempstead Lake in Rockville Center, New York. Originally, it was reported that someone that was just walking near this lake that morning is who spotted her body lying there. But later on, the details of who located her are a little bit more fuzzy. Apparently, it could have just been this passerby, like I mentioned, or a group of fishermen, or maybe even young boys who were fishing in the area that found her. But something interesting that was mentioned early on in reporting on this case was that authorities were keeping the identity of the individual or individuals who found her confidential. And another weird thing was that they weren't releasing the names of the people she worked for in Belmore either. Like, it was specifically stated this way in the media, that they were keeping that info to themselves.
I don't think you have to put any of that out to the public.
No? Okay.
If you don't know where this investigation is going yet, and you have limited resources, you don't want to put out information that may negatively impact your investigation when you get a little further into it.
Okay.
So now you have these people that reported this girl. What if there's some type of connection later on and you had put their information out there and then they got spooked about, police looking into them, or you have, these people that located her, and then the town gathers their pitchforks and torches and they're like, oh, they must have had something to do with it.
Okay, that's what I was going to get into next, was like, do you think that it could be to protect those people and to say, like, yes, they called this in, but we've already, talked to them and cleared them. We don't want you guys to think that they had any involvement here.
I think it's more to protect the investigation.
Yeah.
More so than the people themselves.
It makes me think about the Idaho murders, the quadruple murder right now, where there's so much talk about the 911 call and who made the call and whose phone it came from and why it happened so late. And that's something that they're not releasing. And people are honing in on the fact that they're not saying who made that call. And it's like, is it because people are going crazy because this case has been so heavily publicized and it's literally nationally all over the country, everybody's talking about it, and they don't want, to have that same issue with this caller versus like this case that we're talking about now? Is it kind of similar is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think things nowadays are a little more touchy than back then.
Yeah.
Just because you got the internet, everybody's got an opinion.
Very true.
They're going to start rumors, and then rumors snowball and things can go crazy fast.
Oh, for sure. I've seen it with that case in particular anyway.
Yeah, I think that with this particular case, all you need to put out to the public at this point is what you know to be true. as far as what happened to Mary Beth. You don't necessarily have to release all the information of the players involved in finding her, who she worked for, and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I get it. All right, so Mary Beth's body was found in this area, which was also said to be about 200 yards west of Peninsula Boulevard in Rockville Center, New York, roughly between 10:30 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. on that Wednesday, May 10th, 1972. Now, I've done my best to find the location of where her body was found on an aerial map, but it's a little bit difficult to fully pin it down. So, John, I'll send you the map now, and for everyone listening, as always, a copy of a photo of the area, or I'll also put a link of it, just so you can get to, like, the Google Maps, but that will be on our socials and our website.
So we're looking at Hempstead Lake?
Correct, yeah. So when you're looking at that, Hempstead Lake is, like, right in the middle, and then Peninsula Boulevard runs pretty much parallel to it. So I can only assume that she was found along that side, and the area is, I think at least, like where the creek was, likely covered by trees today. And maybe that's why I haven't been able to nail down exactly like where the stream or creek, whatever you want to call it, is within this aerial footage. And it was also stated that there was this wooded area of roughly 2 acres of trees near the lake, which again, according to this map, that appears to be pretty accurate. And the woods do, you know, kind of completely cover the entirety around there. So I'm wondering, like, you know, it goes back to like who found her, you know, whether they had like a regular walking path, you know, that they did in that area and they walked past this creek and that's how they found her.
Do you know if this creek or body of water is along the bus route that she had taken home?
So we're going to get into that in a little bit. But the weird thing is when it was reported, it said it was like 1.5 miles away. But based on my research, it seems like maybe double that. But again, you don't know exact location. So if you were to take like longitude and latitude of the exact spot where she was last seen at the bus versus where Hempstead Lake is, sure, it might be closer, but I would say it's still not like a fair walking distance. And I don't know if the bus took this route and this could have been like somewhere where she just stopped off. Unfortunately, I don't know those details.
Okay, and how far was this from her house? Or from, I guess, the bus stop where she would have stopped to get off? Do you know?
So can you just open up the other map I have for you so you can see a little bit better?
Okay, so she would have gotten off in Mineola?
Yeah, so you can see up at the top there's Mineola, so that's the most north. Then in the middle you can see like there's West Hempstead. Hempstead Lake State Park is right there in the middle, and then Rockville Center is south of that. And then you can't forget Belmore as well, which is where she was coming from. That's to the east, like all the way on the other side of like where this map is.
So what is Rockville Center? Is that where she would have gotten on the bus?
So Rockville Center is the location of where her body was found.
Okay, which is near Hempstead Lake.
Correct. And Rockville Center is a village within the town of Hempstead.
Okay.
So they're all technically in the same town, and I would say the furthest distance in any which way is like 7 or 8 miles and a 20-minute drive. So I wouldn't say that any of these places are particularly far from one another, but
it's not like she would have gotten on the bus near Hempstead Lake. Somebody got her before she got on the bus.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into that a little bit more in a few minutes. So we'll table that for now and we'll get back to it in a little bit.
So we'll utilize these maps essentially as we know that she was found in Rockville Center, and then Mineola was where her destination was.
Correct, yes.
So we have the distance from Hempstead Lake to her final destination.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Now, after Edmund, Mary Beth's father, identified the body located in the creek that morning as his 21-year-old daughter, the Nassau County Police Department got to work on her case. So, as always, we'll start with the initial investigation, but I'll tell you now, there's just not a lot that I was able to find, and it seems to me that many details on Mary Beth's murder have been kept out of the public eye for decades. But either way, let's start with the scene. To begin, we already know the location of the scene as we just discussed that a little bit, but something else regarding this creek where Mary Beth's body was located is that it was said that there was this bridge over the creek on Main Avenue, but I cannot for the life of me nail down where Main Avenue is on the map that I just sent to you, John, and for everyone listening. If anybody can find it, please tell me because I can't seem to find it on there. Either way, there was a bridge right over the creek. Authorities believed that whoever left Mary Beth's body there had actually dropped her body over the bridge from roughly 10 feet above. And the stream/creek, whatever you want to call it, where she was found was not very big. So it doesn't appear to me that the person who left her body here was trying to conceal her and hoping that she would just never be found. It's reported that the creek was only about 12 to 15 feet wide and only 1.5 feet deep. So there was no way that Mary Beth wouldn't have been located relatively soon after she was left there, with the creek being this shallow. So for me, I personally think that if this individual didn't want her body to be located, they could have just driven a little further and placed her in Hempstead Lake, which is a much larger body of water. I don't know exactly what this means or, trying to figure out who her killer is, but I thought that it would be good to bring up, and that's just, my opinion on it. But
yeah, that is interesting to know. Like you said, if they were trying to conceal it, they could have driven just a short distance further to a gigantic lake.
Exactly. It's not even like it was miles away. It was probably like a 1 or 2 minute drive from that specific location.
Does that make you think that the person that did this maybe didn't know the area that well, and they saw a bridge, they saw water underneath, they didn't know how deep it was?
I think I could go either way with it, because it could be a dumping site, like a place where someone would use like this specific location and maybe like regularly drove along this route and would just kind of like leave their victims in these places. Or it could be exactly like you said, they didn't know the area and they figured, great, I can just, utilize
bridge,
this.
Water,
exactly. It'll flow and then maybe someone won't be able to find her. But of course, if you didn't know the area, you would never know that it was such a shallow creek. So I think it really could go either way.
So was there an autopsy completed and released?
Yes, and we're about to dive into that.
All right. Because when you first said that her head was submerged, you think of, we have a young female that suffers from seizures. My question of, was this creek area along the route of where she would have taken the bus to and gotten off and then maybe walked along this creek, had a seizure, fell into the water. Nobody was there to help her. Could she have drowned, even though it's a shallow body of water?
I see totally.
Could that have happened?
Why you're thinking that way, and you're asking those questions, and I'll tell you right now that is absolutely not what happened.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, I didn't think you thought that's what happened, but that is, something that you would think in,
like,
as an investigator initially, what happened, and then obviously having an autopsy completed gives you more answers.
Right.
So,
and you could also tell, being an investigator, when you get to this site,
yes,
if she was dropped from 10 to 12 feet high, there's going to be more trauma done to her body than if she was just walking along this creek, had a seizure, and fell.
Yes, totally agree with that as well. All right, so now I wanted to go over what Mary Beth was found wearing. Now, it was stated that she was clothed in a, quote, one-piece blue and white hot pants suit, end quote, which initially I believed to be like a one-piece jumpsuit, which is kind of what we'd call it today. And for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically like one big onesie that's not really very comfortable, at least in my opinion, because you have to get naked to pee, and I really am just not a fan of that. But upon further research, hot pants actually appear to be shorts. So instead of a jumpsuit, which is usually pants, I would call what she was found wearing a romper.
Oh, okay.
So,
I was thinking like a shorts overall type deal.
So you're close, yeah. So I actually have a couple example pictures that I'm going to send to you, John. And again, everybody listening, I will have these photos on our socials and our website. And I just want to make it clear, these are not actual pictures of what Mary Beth was said to be wearing. I truly don't know what it looked like outside of the description of it being white and blue, but I thought some type of example would be helpful to kind of picture it. In that last picture, it would be the woman that's closest to the camera.
I see why they called them hot pants. All of these pictures.
Yeah.
Very hot pantsy.
Very, very short.
Yeah, very short.
Shorts.
But like they're also taken, and you know what it reminds me of?
Yeah.
It reminds me of like go-go dancers from Austin Powers.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
like the type of thing that they would wear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, I feel like this just at least gave like a good idea of what it would look like.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because thinking about it today too, like a hot pants suit, like if you're not thinking about what that would look like, you might not actually be envisioning the right thing. Because at first I thought just like a jumpsuit.
But yeah, so that gives a good idea of, what she was wearing.
Yeah.
And when I was saying, I understand why they were called hot pants, these pictures I feel like are on the borderline of risque for the times.
Yeah, a little bit, I would say so. But I also thought that this would be something that Mary Beth totally would be wearing
All
because
dolled
it's
up.
like nice and dolled up. You throw on some like high boots and,
right.
you have your hair all done. Maybe she has a cute jacket on over top. So I was like, all right, this fits with like her whole style.
Yep,
So
definitely.
Also, she was said to have been found with at least some of, or maybe even all of her jewelry still on her. I'm not sure exactly how much she wore every day, but regardless, she was said to be wearing a ring with a red rose and a blue daisy that was situated on her left hand. And then she also had another ring on her right hand that said love on it, which was yellow gold. Outside of that, it was stated that her stockings, or her tights, and her shoes were both missing. So the only clothing on her body was that one-piece romper or hot pants suit. Also, according to a piece in the Mineola American, not only were Mary Beth's stockings and shoes missing, at least in terms of her clothing, but so was her handbag, which her sister explained that Mary Beth not having her purse with her would have been totally unusual, specifically because of her epilepsy diagnosis. She always had her medication in her purse on her person. Now, in terms of any evidence collected at the scene, that's tough to say. First and foremost, we can't forget that this was 1972. DNA wasn't even a thought in anyone's mind, but who knows if there was some sort of collection of evidence or physical evidence that could be tested later on down the road. And I don't know much else regarding what was found at the creek, but I have seen one thing mentioned regarding evidence gathered, but the only place I've ever seen it reported was on the Project Cold Cases write-up on Mary Beth's murder. So basically, something I didn't tell you that I probably should have, but is that Mary Beth's father was actually a New York City police officer. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, like maybe more pushing by the family to get her reported missing.
I'm surprised they got the runaround to begin with then.
Oh, absolutely. But I feel like it's still another thing that we hear about. Like we talked about it with Lynn Vest and Jeremy Pickens. They tried to tell Don, nah, we'll just wait. And he was like, absolutely not.
Right.
So maybe it was that type of situation where he went back and was like, listen up, buddy.
Right.
I'm an NYC police officer. You're going to report my daughter missing. So I could see that happening. But anyway, according to the Project Cold Case write-up on Mary Beth's murder, both her father and her brothers went to the scene the day after her body had been found and obviously removed, and they took some time to search around. When they were there, they actually found a purse belonging to another woman somewhere either in or nearby to the creek. It's unclear where it was found, how close to Mary Beth's body it was, or even who it belonged to. But I think it's pretty interesting that this purse was just left there and that authorities wouldn't have at least collected it the day before. So that leads me to question, could it be connected to her murder in some way? Did it belong to another victim? Or could this be totally innocuous and potentially have been left there in the in-between from when Mary Beth's body was found and then the day later when her father and brothers came? And I just don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that.
I mean, I think it's a pretty low chance that it wasn't there when investigators,
I agree.
Were there. But this reminds me of the first episode of the new season of Unsolved Mysteries, where you had a young girl that was killed.
Yep.
Or at least we believe she was probably killed.
Yeah.
And the family went out to the scene after the fact and found all this evidence.
Yep.
I understand that this was not Mary Beth's purse, but it's in the area where she was murdered.
You would collect anything.
Right. You gather everything that's there.
It makes me think of the Short family murder and how it was reported that they collected like upwards of 1,000 pieces of evidence or something. Like
you gather
would
everything.
Pick up everything that's in that area. So it's just strange to me that he would go and he would have to find that and the Nassau County Police Department didn't.
Yeah. Strange.
Yeah, it's weird. Now we're going to move on to the autopsy findings. So there was a lot that just wasn't discussed in terms of Mary Beth's injuries, her cause of death, or really, honestly, the majority of the findings in the early days of the investigation. But as time went on, more and more information did come out, so I'll give you a rundown of everything that I know regarding her autopsy. First of all, Mary Beth's cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Ligature or manual, that I'm not so sure about. She was also said to have bruises and abrasions on both her neck and face, but it was never confirmed for sure if she'd potentially been beaten before she was killed, or kind of like what John mentioned before, if she had been dropped from this 10-foot high bridge, could she have suffered injuries on the way down as well?
Right.
It was also determined that she'd only been deceased for about 24 hours prior to when her body was found. And in terms of sexual assault, the ME was unable to determine that due to the fact that her body had been in the water for what was believed to be at least 12 hours.
Okay, so her body wasn't found for 5 days.
Yeah.
But she had only been dead for 24 hours.
Correct.
Was she captured and held somewhere? You have to believe so, because
you would think
she wouldn't have been missing for 4 days prior to that without trying to contact family or trying to get home.
Yeah, it's very strange. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about it, unfortunately.
That is strange.
Yeah. So something else that I wanted to bring up and touch on again, I guess, would be in regards to the potential of a sexual assault having occurred, because the ME was unable to determine it. But I wanted to talk about what Mary Beth was found wearing. We know that she was in that one-piece hot pants suit, aka a romper. Now, I have no idea the state that her clothing was in, whether it was ripped or cut or anything like that, or if it was completely intact, no issues.
But you have to think that if somebody had sexually assaulted her, they would have had to remove that entire outfit.
And put it back on.
And put it back on after the fact.
So that's where I got a little bit hung up, and it could mean nothing. It could be something that I'm just stuck on for no reason, but it would be hard for me to believe that a perpetrator who had now potentially, sexually assaulted her and then murdered this young girl would take the time to put this clothing item back on her. It's essentially an adult-sized onesie.
Yes, but she was missing for 5 days.
Yes.
Dead for approximately 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't discount the fact that she could have been held hostage for at minimum, let's say, 3.5 days.
Mm-hmm.
If she was, kept in a room,
and she
sexually
was still
assaulted,
alive. Yeah. And
then, whatever happens there, she gets dressed again.
Mm-hmm.
Then she ends up murdered after the fact.
Yeah, that is very true. That didn't exactly come into my brain at that point. And that's why it's good to have these discussions, because that wasn't exactly something that I was thinking while I was initially researching this. Mm-hmm. So it's a good point to bring up. I just didn't know if it would have any relevance to the sexual assault piece of things.
It's understandable that doesn't pop into your head right away, because this is not your typical, she was found nude, dead within the last 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
This is something where she was unaccounted for an extended period of time, then found, and then her time of death is sometime within 24 hours of when she was located.
Yeah.
So now we have to think about that unaccounted time in between when she was last seen, when she was believed to be murdered, and then when she was found.
Mm-hmm. And that makes me think of Elva Poor, too. That was something that the police said it was like 30 hours in between, and they were sure she hadn't, been deceased for that long. So where was she during those 30 hours?
Right.
It's the same thing here. Also, we're going to go back into something that John and I started to talk about a little while ago, and that's regarding where Mary Beth was last seen. And we're going to dive into that a little bit, because I feel like it is a little bit confusing. So it's reported that Mary Beth was last seen in the Hempstead, New York area, and more specifically at the bus station there. But the whole reason I say it gets a little confusing is because we know her body was found in Rockville Center, which I had mentioned before is a village within Hempstead. So how was she seen, potentially up to 2 miles away, still technically within the same town, but so the whole thing's a little weird. John, I want you to look at that map that I sent you again, the one that shows Mineola, Hempstead, Rockville Center, and then Belmore over to the east.
Okay.
So it was reported that Mary Beth did frequent certain places in Hempstead pretty regularly, and I think it's most likely because she was there several times a week when she would take the bus to and from her job in Belmore. But the thing that I don't understand is why she would be at a bus station in a town several miles away. So it's at least 4 to 5 miles from Belmore. It's not a comfortable walking distance for her to get from Belmore to Hempstead. That wouldn't be possible. So the only thing that I can think of is maybe she took 2 buses or like more than one bus.
That's what I was going to guess, is maybe her final destination was not on the route that the bus that she got on in Belmore
took. That's
so
a good point.
Maybe Belmore went to Rockville Center, then she went Rockville Center to Mineola.
Yeah, no, but she was seen in Hempstead. So the Hempstead bus station is
right,
not near the Rockville
Center
location where her body was found.
Okay.
So just to clarify, Hempstead Lake is technically in Rockville Center, and that's where she was found. But the overarching town is Hempstead.
Right, but if you look at the map,
Yeah,
so she was in Belmore and she was babysitting
correct.
or nannying.
Mhm.
If you go from Belmore to Rockville Center and you put that on the map,
Looks like a more straight shot.
that is
along.
a main road
Mm,
where a bus could very well be making frequent stops.
that's true. Yeah.
That bus may be continuing west on that main road all the way, so she takes the Rockville Center or Hempstead
I see what you're saying. Yep.
exit or stop,
Mm-hmm.
gets off there, does whatever if she's seen in the Hempstead area, maybe stopping to get something for the dance or doing whatever,
Yeah.
then takes the bus from there up north.
That makes perfect sense. And that's why I wanted to chat with you about it, because usually you have these like thoughts in your head that make sense that like just I'm not thinking about when I'm researching this. So I think that's a good point to make. I wouldn't have thought that you have this, more straight shot from Belmore to Rockville Center, and then, you would go north from there, because it is literally, looking at this map, Belmore to Rockville Center is straight west,
Right.
and then Rockville Center to Mineola is straight north. So who knows how the bus routes ran back then, but...
So on Google Maps, you can select the bus and it shows current transit routes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if these are the same that they used to be, but when you plot out, Belmore to Mineola, you have Belmore running totally west through Rockville Center, like we said.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another route that you can get on Rockville Center. Boom, brings you straight north to Mineola.
Yep. That's probably exactly what it was. That makes perfect sense, and why she would have been seen in that location. It's not like she's walking from Belmore to Rockville Center. That's not possible. It's miles away.
Right, and she may have wanted to stop there too.
Yeah.
If there's a shop or something.
Well,
that she
yeah,
wanted
there
to
were
go to.
places that she had been seen at before, like
Right.
whether they be restaurants or coffee shops or things like that. So I bet that's exactly what it was. Look at John coming in clutch with all the good info.
Yes, but this is also current days.
Of
stuff
course,
too,
yeah.
so-
But, I mean, you can assume it's probably similar. I highly doubt things have changed that much.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably more infrastructure around, but I think that it's a fair guess
I agree.
to say that was what she did.
Definitely. Now, just 2 months after Mary Beth Heinz was found murdered in Rockville Center, another young woman's body was located in nearly the exact same location. On July 20th, 1972, an unidentified black female was found in the creek near Peninsula Boulevard and Main Ave. Again, those same two streets we talked about before. And again, it was believed that the perpetrator had dumped this girl's body over the bridge down into the stream below.
That's a strange pattern.
Yes, it is. And that's what I was saying before about, could this be a particular site that someone frequented regularly with their victims? And this was somewhere where they were comfortable and they knew they could just drop them off and leave. Now, it was reported that it was 3 young boys who were playing in the woods near the area under this bridge who discovered this unidentified woman's body. The young woman was initially believed to be around 18 years old, roughly 110 pounds, and 5 feet 5 inches tall. She was found partially nude with only a black tank top and shoes on. And I just want to note that there were some discrepancies in reporting on what type of shoes she was wearing. One report stated black sandals, but another said high black leather boots. That's a big old difference if you ask me, but regardless of the conflicting reports on the unidentified girl's footwear, the common thing that was reported was that this woman was found nude from the waist down.
Nude from the waist down. I'm thinking Mary Beth was nude from like the thighs down.
Technically, because she wasn't wearing her stockings or shoes.
It's strange that this girl still had her shoes.
Oh, absolutely. And pretty much right from the start on reporting on this case, authorities believed that the same offender could have committed both the murders of Mary Beth and now this unidentified black female.
I mean, you have 2 girls roughly the same age, only a few years difference.
Yeah.
Both murdered and thrown over this bridge.
The
into this
exact
creek.
same location. Exactly. And so close in the time frame as well.
Yeah, that's a pattern that you can't disregard.
Exactly. You have to look at it. Authorities were working to try and identify the young woman, but within the first few days didn't have much luck. But by day 8, the Nassau County Police Department was able to give the young woman her name back and publicly confirmed that the girl found in the creek was 23-year-old Laverne Moye, who was from Queens, New York. It's reported that investigators had been doing something called a dog census, which is essentially the same thing as a census for the human population in an area, but instead for dogs. So that was interesting. I had never heard of that before.
And why were they doing this?
I don't know. But that's what it was, like a dog census. I was like, is this some strange term I've never heard before? And I Googled it and it was like, no, it's just to count the number of dogs in an area.
It's to make sure that people register their dogs and pay for them.
I bet. So I guess as authorities were doing this, they decided to show the photo of the young woman that was found in the creek to individuals that they were speaking to while completing this census of the dogs in the area to see if they might be able to get any leads on who she might have been. And they actually met with a woman named Ethel Tinsley, and when she saw the photo, she believed that it could have been her daughter, and it was later confirmed that it was, in fact, Ethel's daughter, who was Laverne Moye.
Had Laverne's mother reported her missing?
I'm not sure. Unfortunately, like I said in the beginning, Mary Beth's case was really not publicized very much, and this one, as well as another that we're going to dive into, honestly, 2 to 4 articles max that I could find like on the entirety of the internet.
And again, this is the 70s. This is the free-spirited people time. So not to give, the benefit of the doubt to police to say, oh, yeah, they'll come back type deal. But people could have been living a lifestyle where they came and went.
Exactly, yeah.
Relatively freely.
But I would say Laverne wasn't like that based on what I know anyway. So I had mentioned earlier that there was the potential that, these 2 cases could be linked. So I want to give you a little bit of information about Laverne, and then we'll dive into potential similarities and differences between these 2 cases. So first of all, at the time of Laverne's murder, she was 23 years old and was the mother of 2 children, a 5-year-old boy named John and a 4-year-old daughter named Monique. Laverne and her husband were said to be separated at the time, though. Also, come to find out, Laverne worked in the same town that Mary Beth Heinz lived in, and she was a ward clerk at the Nassau Hospital in Mineola, New York. And interestingly enough, authorities were able to positively identify Laverne through her employment records because the hospital had required fingerprinting to be completed on all new employees when they got hired, so investigators were able to track down those fingerprint records and confirm a match.
Just throwing this out there now, knowing that Mary Beth was going to Mineola and that Laverne worked in Mineola, were they both taken from Mineola back south?
Hey, it's possible. It really is. You don't know. I mean, obviously, there was a sighting of Mary Beth in Hempstead, but that doesn't mean that
she didn't get on the bus there.
Exactly. That doesn't mean that someone just didn't see her or no one ever came forward as having seen her in Mineola. So it's possible.
So, using our powers of deduction,
yep.
The common factor of where these 2 women could have been at the time while they were still alive is Mineola.
Yeah.
So you have Mineola and you have Hempstead Lake area. Those are the 2 places that come up with both cases.
Yep, definitely. And I'm sure that's, obviously why police are thinking there is definitely the potential that these 2 cases are linked. So let's kind of review similarities and maybe differences depending on what you think. But Laverne had been last seen also several days prior to when her body was found. So similarly to Mary Beth, where she was seen 5 days before her body was found. So Laverne was seen on July 17th by her grandmother, who she'd been living with at the time, and then her body was located 3 days later on the 20th. Also, obviously, like we just talked about, the fact that they were found in the exact location off the same bridge in the same creek had to have some influence with authorities to say, yeah, we think there's a connection here.
Right, because if it was 2 different people, you'd have to think that the person that killed Laverne was trying to be like a copycat.
Yeah, but it's like, how would they have known? Mary Beth's murder wasn't very highly publicized at that point, so anything other than them being connected didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Another similarity between the 2 had to do with the women's injuries and their causes of death. According to Laverne's autopsy, her cause of death was confirmed to be, quote, asphyxiation due to manual strangulation, end quote. Now, we talked earlier about how the cause of death for Mary Beth wasn't confirmed up front, but it was later said to be strangulation. So now that you're looking at authorities saying, hey, we think these 2 cases are connected, I had said before I didn't know if it was ligature strangulation or manual, you can probably assume that it was more than likely the exact same cause of death for the 2 women if they're thinking that these are connected.
Right, and I mean, even if there is a weapon of opportunity like a rope or something in regards to Mary Beth's strangulation, it's still strangling someone to death, regardless if it's manual, via hand, or
with an object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So same manner of death, same location being found.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, how can you
not say that they are somewhat linked?
Exactly. The two women were also said to have similar injuries and bruises to their heads and necks, but Laverne did also have a cut on her cheek. Also, remember how I said Mary Beth was found with her head submerged under the water? Well, the same thing was said about Laverne when she was located in the creek as well. So it's odd that they would be found in almost essentially the exact same position, too.
Well, this person, if it was the same person, probably went to the same spot.
Did it the exact
same way. Threw them over
the
same exact way.
Yep.
I think that the injuries to their heads and necks are probably consistent with both death by strangulation and
the fall.
Falling, remember, dead weight.
10
falling
feet.
10 feet onto rocks and water.
Yeah, and they're also roughly the same size, too, about the same height, only a little bit off on the weight. So you would think that taking into account science and the law of physics or whatever, you know, how their bodies would fall would probably be similar because they're similar sized women.
Yeah.
And yet another similarity had to do with the fact that both women had been deceased for roughly 24 hours prior to when their bodies were found and were in the water for at least 12 of those hours, which goes back to what we were saying about Mary Beth before, and if she had been held somewhere. Same thing with Laverne. It was 3 days in between of when she was last seen and when her body was found. So again, those are just so consistent with each other, being almost like these crimes were identical.
Yes.
They look so similar.
It seems that way.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, it was reported that Laverne was also found wearing her jewelry as well. And according to the Daily News' reporting on Laverne's case, quote, the girl was wearing 8 pieces of costume jewelry, including 3 silver wire bracelets, a silver watch, a yellow metal ring, a gold ring with a lavender stone, a silver wire type expansion ring, and a silver identification type bracelet, end quote. Now, something else that I want to mention has to do with what the two girls were found wearing. And we obviously know, we talked about it a lot with Mary Beth, she was in that one-piece hot pants suit. But then we know a little bit different with Laverne's case is that she was found nude from the waist down. But according to her autopsy, the ME was also not able to be sure if Laverne had been sexually assaulted because, again, she was in the water for 12 or more hours, so it made it difficult for the ME to determine that. But I would think nude from the waist down, you're more than likely, you know, along those same lines. You could consider that a difference in these two cases, or you could consider it a similarity. I think it can go both ways, depending on, you know, if you knew for sure if there was a sexual assault or not. But again, it's like these two cases are so similar to me, I don't see how you could ever rule them out as not being connected.
Yeah, I think regardless of those differences where Mary Beth was clothed essentially, I mean, she only really had one article of clothing.
Yeah, no stockings, no shoes. So same thing, they're both missing clothing.
Right.
So I think that's an indicator in some way. Now, fast forward almost a year to April of 1973. Yet another murder took place near the same area where Mary Beth and Laverne's bodies were found, which this murder, yet again, is so underreported, it's ridiculous. And for this one, I could only track down 2 articles in all of newspapers.com that reported on this young woman's murder.
Which I just have to say, I assume that there are similarities here if you're bringing it in onto Mary Beth's case. So you have Mary Beth, who seemed to have had probably the most reporting done on her.
Yes.
Most likely because of the police connection with her father, I assume. Then you have Laverne, similar manner of death, found in the same location. Now that we're getting to the third person, you would think, if there are similarities here, reporting should really ramp up on all 3 individuals.
Yes.
Because now we have, you know, you're just snowballing. So it's like, hey, this is a real threat to women of this age in this area.
But
you would think reporting would be increased.
But there's a reason, I think anyway, why it wasn't. So between April 6th and April 8th of 1973, the date range is a little fuzzy, a woman's body was discovered in the Mill River, which was located in Hempstead, New York, which, based on my research, is roughly 4 miles or a 14-minute drive away from Hempstead Lake, where both Mary Beth and Laverne were found. So it's not like this woman was found in the exact same area, but she was found nearby within the same town. So authorities confirmed in this case, again, similarly to the other 2, that this woman had been deceased for at least 24 hours by the time her body was found. But I will say, no cause of death for her has ever been reported. Now, this woman that was found wasn't identified at first either, similarly to Laverne, but she was described as a Black woman ranging anywhere from 20 to 35 years in age. She was 5 feet 8 inches tall, roughly 145 to 150 pounds, and was found wearing a tan suede coat with fur on the wrists and collar, and underneath that coat, she was wearing a purple sweatshirt with the abbreviation BMCC written on the front. There were no comments in reporting, though, if she was wearing bottoms. Just those two clothing items were mentioned, the coat and the sweatshirt. And this woman was later identified as 24-year-old Dorothy Anderson, who, mind you, was literally from almost the exact same area of Queens that Laverne was from, and she also worked as a nurse's aide. So I think there are eerie similarities to Laverne, if you ask me. Are you looking up BMCC right now? Because I already did that.
Yeah, Borough of Manhattan Community College.
That's exactly what I came up with. Yeah. So, I mean, you would assume that that's likely, maybe that's how they found out who she was or something like that. But yeah, so I would assume she probably attended the college.
But yeah, more similarities.
More, yeah. But investigators stated pretty much right off the bat that there was absolutely no connection between her murder and the murders of Mary Beth or Laverne.
Okay, even if they rule this third one out, I'm still on the hook
for the other two.
That the other two are.
For sure, yeah. So I was surprised when I first read that. They seemed so set in their belief that there was no connection. They just flat out were like, nope, absolutely not.
I wonder if it had to do with manner of death. Or...
Literally, exactly what I was about to say.
Okay, I was going to say if this was like a brutal murder or manner of death was way different.
Like if it was a stabbing versus...
A stabbing, a shooting.
Strangulation.
Bludgeoning, something like that versus the strangulation. So.
Yeah.
So what was it?
Don't know. Never been reported.
Oh, they never reported it?
Never. I've never seen it. Like I said, there are 2 articles on this woman. No pictures of her. No pictures of Laverne. I was beyond aggravated the entire time I was researching this because it's like, why?
Well, then you're not convincing me that this woman is not connected to the other 2.
That's how I felt about it too. Like, why can you just say that in one of 2 articles on the entirety of reporting on this case and then never come back to it and never have another discussion about it? Even in recent years, she's not even mentioned.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past agencies at the time being like, if we have a 3rd woman killed and they're all linked together, the community is going to go ballistic.
Yeah.
So I could see them being like, oh, they have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
Just to try and diffuse the situation.
Yeah, but isn't it weird? So this is the thing that stood out to me.
I'm not saying that they did that, of course. But.
No. So it says on this particular website, which I'm going to bring up in a little bit, but it states that for Laverne, that she resided in the Springfield, Jamaica Access Corridor of Queens. And then for Dorothy, exact same location. She resided in the Springfield, Jamaica Access Corridor. How? How is it possible that if they're not connected, they're from the exact same place?
Right.
And then you also have one of those 2 victims found in the exact same spot as Mary Beth. Like, all of these cases just make me think that there's got to be a connection here. And I want to know what police knew for them to just completely discount them as having been connected.
Yeah, you would have to put out some type of information just to prove that they're not connected.
That people in the area shouldn't be scared for their lives.
I mean, you don't have to, but
well, of course
you would hope that they would. And just like say, hey, there is no connection. MOs are totally different. And give some type of facts.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree.
Did this 3rd female have any connection to Mineola at all?
Not that I know of. No, I know she was a nurse's aide, but I don't know.
So it is tough. Like if we were to have a Venn diagram, essentially, you have Laverne and Mary Beth having a connection to 2 places, essentially. Maybe a Venn diagram is not the best way to do it, but you have where the bodies were found and Mineola as connections for Laverne and Mary Beth. But then you have Queens as the connection
between
Laverne these other girls.
And Dorothy, yeah. Also, the other thing is, so when I did my research on the location of, where Mill River was versus Hempstead Lake, I got about 3 to 4 miles difference. But then on other sites, it says that she was found only a half mile south of where the other 2 girls were found. It's possible that this person just couldn't leave this woman at the bridge where he had left both Laverne and Mary Beth, and now he, just went a couple miles south to leave Dorothy. So I think regardless of the fact that they're not found in the exact same location doesn't necessarily mean anything to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, they're still close enough.
Exactly.
Because if you look at Hempstead Lake, and then based on the information that we had put in earlier to the Google Maps, that westbound bus route that Mary Beth could have taken essentially is just north of Mill River Complex Park, which is Mill River. But yeah, it doesn't seem like a huge distance from Hempstead Lake to this other area.
Yeah. I feel like
it's close enough. It's close enough. Exactly. It's another woman roughly of the same age, but we don't know cause of death and we don't know all these other factors. So it's like, if you had to flip a coin, it could probably be connected. Maybe it wasn't. But time frame, age
range, even body type, like all of that, it's all so similar.
Right.
So, like I said in the beginning of this episode, at least 2 of these cases brought a serial killer to my attention, and specifically Mary Beth's and Laverne's, since authorities believed those to pretty much definitively be connected. And there are several recent developments that have made authorities in Nassau County, as well as other departments in New York and New Jersey, re-review their cases from roughly 1967 to 1980 in hopes of connecting at least some of those to this serial killer. Now, I could have told you these stories without mentioning the serial killer altogether, but I think there is a good possibility that he could potentially be linked to at least one of these cases. So I felt it necessary to do some research and give you an abbreviated rundown on him and his crimes. I will say, authorities have not publicly stated at all that Mary Beth, Laverne, or even Dorothy's cases are connected to this person or could be connected to this person. The only thing I've seen reported that even brought this to my attention was an article in Pix 11 that explained that Nassau County had 13 unsolved homicides from this time frame, which included Mary Beth and Laverne's cases. Despite the fact that there are some differences in this serial killer's other crimes, some of the similarities are what made me decide to start digging into this. So I did my most in-depth dive into a serial killer that I have yet, which, mind you, is probably not nearly as in-depth as other podcasts or researchers have gone, but I feel like I gathered a good amount of info on this guy, and I wanted to review the other murders this person has been connected to, his MO, and other pieces of info about him to see if you thought there could be a connection. Also, just forewarning, some of the subject matter we'll be discussing is quite brutal, so I just wanted to give a heads up for listeners that some of this information is particularly disturbing. So, the serial killer in question is Richard Cottingham. John, have you ever heard of this man?
No.
I didn't think so, because I'd actually never heard of him either. Richard Cottingham was from Lodi, New Jersey, which, just for reference, is only about 36 miles or a 30 to 45-minute drive depending on traffic from Rockville Center or Hempstead, New York, where Mary Beth, Laverne, and Dorothy were found. Now, Richard actually worked in Manhattan for the Blue Cross Blue Shield Insurance Company as a computer programmer. He was also a married father of 3 children who'd gotten separated from his wife, I believe, in the late 70s, and they were officially divorced in 1981. Now, I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to structure this next part of the episode because this isn't really common territory for me. So I'll just start by letting you know that Cottingham was most likely killing women between 1967 and 1980, from the time he was about 20 years old to roughly 33 or 34. Now, we'll dive into his victims, both confirmed, presumed, confessed to, and even survivors of his in just a minute. But I want to fast forward a bit to 1980 when Richard was arrested, and then we'll backtrack from there. So on May 22nd, 1980, Richard had picked up a woman by the name of Leslie Ann Odell and brought her to the Hasbrouck Heights Quality Inn in Hasbrouck Heights, New Jersey. In this location, Richard assaulted Leslie, cut her body with a knife, bit her breasts, raped her, and was likely going to kill her. But thankfully, hotel employees had heard her screaming, and authorities were called, and Richard was subsequently arrested. From there, investigators were able to tie him to at least 4 separate murders, as well as other sexual assaults and attempted murders he'd committed in the years prior to his arrest. Between 1981 and 1984, Cottingham went to trial for the murders of Mary Ann Carr, Dita Goodarzi, and the unidentified female who was with Dita when she was killed, as well as Jean Reiner. He pled not guilty to all counts, but after the trials, where at least 4 of the survivors he'd attacked testified against him, he was found guilty of all of the murders and sentenced to hundreds and hundreds of years in prison. It was reported that Cottingham didn't plead guilty to any of the charges because he was hoping his family would believe he was still innocent. Because remember, this dude literally had 3 children and a wife, who was now his ex-wife by 1981. Either way, though, he went to prison and has been there ever since. Now, before we dive into Cottingham's victims, I do want to give a bit of an explanation of his MO. First and foremost, Richard Cottingham was labeled as both the Times Square killer as well as the torso killer. The torso killer names seem to have come from some of the brutalization and mutilation he perpetrated against only some of his victims, and I believe he was also dubbed the Times Square killer because of the location in which he killed several victims, because remember, he worked in Manhattan.
Do you know if the whole brutalization portion happened more towards the 80s as opposed to earlier on?
I think so. I think it may have been like a
progression.
Yes, a progression. That's the word I was looking for. But generally speaking, Cottingham didn't really have an MO. He would tend to pick up sex workers, but that wasn't, I guess you would say, a requirement for him, for lack of a better term. Yes, several of his victims were sex workers, but there were a fair few that were not. And that's the thing about Cottingham, is that his MO, if there really even is one, is completely all over the place. Most of his victims were close in age, that's one thing I will say, and they were all from the New York and New Jersey areas. And for the most part, it appears as though strangulation was, in large part, the most common cause of death, but it wasn't for all of his victims.
Do we know what his total body count is?
We will dive into that in a minute.
Okay.
And I wanted to say that the fact that strangulation seemed to be the most common cause of death is the thing that really made me think that there could be a possibility here, especially considering at least Mary Beth and Laverne were strangled, and this was earlier on when he had first started.
In his career as a criminal?
Yeah, I mean, so it's obviously we know, which we'll talk about in a minute, but one of his earliest crimes was in 1967. Mm-hmm. This was 5 years later, but there were still 7 to 8 more years after that where he was still continuing these crimes. Now, over the past couple of years, 3 individuals have begun working with Cottingham to try and gain confessions from him regarding other murders he may have committed, because we know that obviously he was convicted of those 4 originally, but most people believe that there were a fair few more. And those 3 people are former Bergen County Chief of Police Robert Anzalotti, criminal historian Dr. Peter Vronsky, and a woman by the name of Jennifer Weiss, who is actually the daughter of one of Cottingham's victims, Dita Godarzi. Overall, their work with him in recent years has produced roughly, I believe, 6 confessions, with the most recent being in 2021 when he confessed to the murders of Lorraine Kelly and Marianne Pryor. And it's even been reported that he's provided potentially even 8 more confessions that authorities are working to see if they can actually tie him to. Even though he hasn't given full confessions on every crime he's allegedly committed, he claims that he's killed anywhere from 85 to 100 women in the time he'd been active from 1967 to 1980.
That's insane.
Yes.
85 to 100 women?
That's what he's claiming.
I mean, this is always the narcissistic portion of serial killers.
100%.
Do we believe him?
We'll see. We can say that he already has at least 11 or 12 confirmed victims, which is a big number. You're double digits there. That's definitely a lot.
So at first, when I was thinking about these people working with him towards trying to get confessions on these things.
Yeah.
Again, from the narcissism portion, this guy probably didn't know who these women were that he was killing. Mm-hmm. So whereas he claims he's killed 85 to 100 women, who knows who they were? So you need people to come forward almost as advocates to say, these are the facts of this case. This is where it happened. Mm-hmm. Did you take part in this?
Yes.
Because you can't just say, oh, did you kill Mary Beth? Oh, did you kill Laverne?
Yeah.
He probably doesn't even know.
Exactly. Yeah. So some people don't necessarily believe it was feasible for him to have been able to kill this many women, while others think a high victim count is certainly possible. So people seem to be very divided on if he could have been this prolific serial killer and, was murdering women every few months for 13 plus years.
Right.
Or if he's just overstating things because he wants to seem better than he is, you know, in his own sick mind.
Yeah.
So, but the crazy thing regarding how these confessions are coming about is that Jennifer Weiss is actually like friendly with him, which I do kind of understand. I watched a couple interviews with her and like how she was explaining everything that she was doing. And it's so sad because one of her biggest goals in this case is she wants to find her mother's head, which Cottingham had removed and placed somewhere. So she's trying to, you know, almost befriend him in a way. And she even said too, quote, "I always wanted him to feel comfortable enough for him to tell me the truth. My approach was definitely not conventional," end quote. So it's like, it's messed up, but, you know.
It makes me think of Mindhunters.
Yeah.
And how...
Ed Kemper.
I remember Ed Kemper, but the detective.
I don't remember either.
So essentially, that's the same thing. You build rapport with this person. You're friendly enough with them. They're locked up for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
You want this to be something that they look forward to.
Yeah.
Coming to talk to you, rehashing these sick things that they've done in the past. So as much as you detest this person, you have an end goal in mind saying, I want to find the rest of my mother's remains.
Yes.
So I'm going to do everything possible to make this person feel comfortable to hopefully get that information.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes me think about our conversation that we just had with LA Not So Confidential. And just to let everyone know, that will be over on their YouTube channel if you want to take a look at our live stream that we did with them. We covered Tracy Crow's case. And it just made me think of what Dr. Scott was saying, where, you know, you have these elderly individuals in prison and, you know, maybe their cognitive abilities are declining and, you know, they just seem like this harmless old man. But then you have to think back to the heinous crimes that they committed.
Right.
And it's this weird situation of seeing like this poor, feeble old man who could never do anything like that again versus this monster that they were 30 years ago.
Should that older person still pay for what their younger self did?
Are they the same person anymore?
I mean, if you're looking at like an overarching opinion on things, I think that regardless of who you turn into later on in life, you need to pay for the crimes that you committed in your youth or earlier on in your life. The reason you're sentenced to prison for whatever period of time is because of what you did. Just because you age and your, you know, cognitive abilities decline and you may become ill, that doesn't take away from the pain that you caused all these other people and families. You got to pay for what you did.
Yeah, I agree. So based on a few pieces I've read regarding the three people who are working with Cottingham, they all have different relationships with him and they work in their own ways to get the info that they obviously want out of him. But all in all, it's not like Cottingham just full on tells them what, you know, they want to hear. He makes this whole situation kind of like a game.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, but also he's like 75 years old. He's in failing health. His memory is failing him. So you have like two different sides of the coin where you're probably looking at someone who is, you know, cognitively there sometimes, which again is something that we just talked to LA Not So Confidential about. And then other times, you know, I'm sure his memory's failing him. He's not, you know, remembering all of these things.
Right.
But when he's cognitively there, it's a game.
Right. So Dr. Scott talked about sundowning, like people with dementia or people with failing mental acuities. In the morning, you get them hydrated, you get them fed, you get them their nutrients and stuff.
Yes.
And they're more with it. And then as the day goes on and it gets later and later, they start to decline further and further. So you kind of have to play a game with them too and catch them at the right time where you can get the information that you want out of them.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is, and you kind of made a comment about this before too, is that Cottingham will give little tidbits of things here and there, and he'll make a comment within their discussions. And it'll take like years sometimes for these people that are working with him to try and piece those tidbits to certain crimes and areas to then bring them to him to say, do you remember this girl? You gave me A, B, and C info and this matches, but how hard must that be to say, oh, he mentioned this particular place that he said he put a body in this year. Let's figure out who this person could have been.
I think the biggest hurdle to get over is that time is a factor because of him.
For sure, yeah.
The older he gets, the worse his health gets. You're less and less likely to get the information you want or to be able to be sure that the information he's giving you is legitimate.
Yeah, definitely. And there was a comment that Dr. Vronsky made to Rolling Stone that stated, quote, "Part of the rapport I have with Cottingham is often just, reminiscing about old New York. Where was the best pastrami in 1977? And once you get him talking, he would sometimes blurt out where he left bodies on his way to get a sandwich at his favorite restaurant. That's how it works. If you ask him a question directly, often he can't frame his memory around an answer. His memories get triggered by mundane discussions," end quote.
Yep, very interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that comment is similar to a lot of interrogations and investigations. When you're too direct with people, especially narcissists,
Oh, for sure.
they know what you want. You need to trick them into giving you the information that you want.
Yes.
And then, of course, again, it's like, is this information accurate? And you have to do your due diligence to make sure that what they told you is true and factual.
Yes.
But you need to get them going. You need to wind them up.
Yeah.
And then once they start giving you all this information, like this Dr. Vronsky said, it's like, oh, once we reminisced about this pastrami and old New York and stuff, then he opened up and he just couldn't shut his mouth.
Exactly.
Because that's what they want.
Oh, for sure. That's
they
exactly
want you
what
to be like enthralled in their stories and all about them.
And that's why I commend Jennifer Weiss for sitting there and listening to this guy and essentially befriending him, knowing the brutality of his crime against your own mother.
Right.
And
that's the end goal in mind.
Yeah. And the thing that's crazy about her too, she was put up for adoption. And when she tried to find her birth mother years later, she went to whatever agency had, worked with her mother when she put her up for adoption.
And stuff.
Yeah. And they called her in and they said, "I'm so sorry to tell you this, but your mother was murdered by a serial killer."
So I wonder if that's why she can distance herself from the crime a little bit more.
Maybe.
Than somebody that was brought up by the mother and then the mother was taken from them. So it's slightly different circumstances, which may give her the upper hand.
Yeah.
In that relationship between her and her mother's killer.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense. But now I want to go over details regarding all of the women that Cottingham either murdered, attempted to kill, because like I said before, there were survivors, their ages and locations of where the attacks took place, along with their causes of death. So we can kind of go through and, obviously take his MO and his other crimes and try and see if there are similarities to the cases that we've talked about already in this episode.
Right, and potentially try to map out the escalation of brutality in those cases.
Definitely. So first of all, John, I've written this all down nice and organized for you so you can review each case, as I know you are not an auditory learner and neither am I. Yeah, exactly. And for all listening, I've actually put all of this info together into a document so that you can do the same. And I'm going to post it on our socials. It'll be on our website as well, just in case you're like us. And if I just say this to you out loud for the next 20 minutes, you're going to be like, what are you even talking about? So you can just go through, look at the list as John and I work through it. Also, I'm going to Discord you a picture of him today.
Santa, maybe a criminal.
Yes. I thought the exact same thing.
Oh, geez.
And then I'm going to send you a picture of him when he was arrested in 1980. Actually, I have two pictures, a mugshot and when he was in handcuffs.
Interesting.
He looks like a sick fuck back in the day, so.
Yeah,
even though he looks like Santa now.
It's one of those things where, you don't want to judge somebody by a single image, but now that we know all of the terrible things that he's done.
Definitely.
He looks like somebody that could fit the bill.
I agree, yeah. Also, I just want to make note before we dive into this list here that you will see on this document the name Diane Cusick. So this is actually a case that has recently been in the news again because DNA was collected from her crime scene, recently tested, and has supposedly matched Richard Cottingham's DNA. He is, of course, innocent until proven guilty, but he has been indicted for that crime as of 2022. He pled not guilty. And something interesting that was reported regarding that was that investigators believe that he's not pleading guilty because he wants access to the discovery file that would be provided to the defense from the prosecution.
So he wants to revel in his old crimes.
Yeah, it's sick. It's absolutely sick.
I also think, too, as much as defense attorneys are probably, up against the wall a lot of times, and it's that's got to be a terrible job.
Yeah.
Defending people that to be pure evil.
Definitely.
But also, defense attorneys don't want you to just be like, oh, plead guilty. Oh, plead guilty.
Yes.
They have a job to do, too, and they want to have a reputation to uphold. Even if you're getting somebody that's terrible off of a crime that they committed.
Yeah.
It's still whatever. But I won't get into my opinions on that.
Yes, we'll save that for another day. But either way, the Nassau County DA, Ann Donnelly, said of Diane's case recently, quote, "We believe this may be the oldest DNA hit to lead to a prosecution in the United States," end quote. And if you caught that, yes.
68?
Yes, it's in 68. And the other thing is, I said the Nassau County DA. Nassau County is the same county where the PD was working on Mary Beth's and Laverne's and Dorothy's cases. So now we know, and this is what has been said recently as well of Diane's case, we know that Cottingham was in the Nassau County area and at least, that time frame.
Yep.
So it's not like, because if you look at this list as well that we're going to dive into, a lot of his earlier crimes were in New Jersey. So when I first looked into this, I was like, ooh, okay, so from 1967 until really 1978, he was, found either guilty or confessed to these crimes all in New Jersey. But if you now know that he was in New York, in specifically the Nassau County area, if he were to be convicted of this crime against Diane Cusick, then he would have been in New York.
Right, as
which
well.
Which would then connect him potentially to Mary Beth and Laverne in some way.
That is all very interesting. But the thing that really caught me, like I said, 68.
Yeah.
You're saying that in 1968, they gathered evidence that was later used for DNA purposes.
Yes.
That has to be a top-notch investigative team that worked that case back then. To gather stuff, preserve it for almost, 25 years probably until...
25 years?
No. Well, no, I'm saying until DNA became like a thing.
Yeah.
So to know that they've had that stuff for such a long period of time and held it and preserved it for that amount of time to then now most recently being able to use that.
Yes.
That's something you don't hear every day.
No, absolutely not. And also, I did just want to mention, I'm going to send this over to you, John, so that you have a link to it. But there's and me being me, it's the Criminal Minds wiki page, where it's kind of like, how they have like the Unsolved Mysteries fandom, whatever. But they have a very comprehensive list of all of his crimes. And you can see, some of the similarities here. I did add a lot of it into this document that I put together, but a lot of it did come from what was on that particular website. So I just wanted to give, everybody out there just info on that. Yeah, if you wanted to take a look at that, you can look at the document I created as well. Doesn't matter. Either way, it'll give you the same info. So looking through this, the first thing that really stood out to me when I was initially looking into Cottingham and trying to potentially connect him to Mary Beth and Laverne, maybe even Dorothy, was the fact that you've got these crimes listed here in 67, 68, 68, 69, 69, and then there's a massive gap from 1969 to 1974. If this man was killing at such a rapid rate, because you can see on here, if he ends up convicted of Diane Cusick, that was February of 68. Then you have Jackie Harp, who is July of 68. Then you have Irene Blaze, who is April of 69. Denise Falaska, who's July of 69. These are all happening within months of each other. Right. How did he go 5 years? I don't think he would have.
Probably wouldn't have.
And I think, obviously, we have Mary Beth, Laverne, and Dorothy's cases all in that time frame. And
unless he was incarcerated for 5 years?
No, I don't think he was. Oh, actually, you know what? He was arrested previously. He had been arrested for several other small things, but I don't think he was ever in prison for a long period of time.
Yeah, so I think that we have some people here that may be connected and that would fill that gap.
What do you mean connected here?
Well, you're talking 69 to 74, right? But then we're talking...
Mary Beth, Laverne, and Dorothy adding in from 72 and 73.
Right.
Yes, agreed. And then you can see, too, as things, like John was saying, progression. So you had 74, then you moved to Marianne Carr in 77.
You wrote this?
Yep.
I'm just briefly browsing it, right?
Yeah.
So you have Nancy Vogel, 67. Cause of death, strangulation. Diane Cusick, 68. Cause of death, strangulation.
Yes.
Jackie Harp, 68. Cause of death, strangulation. Irene Blaze, 69. Cause of death, strangulation. And I mean, it just keeps going on.
And where his crime changes.
74.
Yes.
That gap of when we have Mary Beth's murder, Laverne's murder, Dorothy's murder, those fill that gap. Then 74 happens where you have Lorraine Kelly and Mary Ann Pryor. 74, raped and burned, then drowned to death in a bathtub.
And I will say, so this was the crime that he confessed to most recently in 2021 that was put out publicly that he is more than likely connected to. He confessed to it. He held them for multiple days.
Okay.
Again, connecting back to Mary Beth and to Laverne. I don't know about Dorothy because there wasn't enough reported about her when she was last seen. But if she was also missing for several days but only deceased for 24 hours, same thing can be said about that. And you mentioned before, John, too, that it seems like his crimes could have progressed. And that's when you're seeing it after 74. That is a brutal way to kill someone. Then you're looking at Mary Ann Carr. She was raped, tortured. She was beaten. Then you have, multiple other victims as well that were...
a couple survivors.
Exactly. But what he was doing, he's sexually assaulting. He's attempting to strangle.
And then you have 79 with Dita Godarzi. That was strangulation, but also raped, burned, tortured, disarticulated.
Yes.
Which is a term that we learned the definition of in Michael Kleiman's case.
Correct, yep.
Head and hands removed.
And this, I think, is where the name torso killer came from. Because people were saying, like, by this point, his crimes were particularly brutal. He was also removing women's breasts and leaving them. And he was just
And these
escalating.
Are things that he confessed to.
If you see on here, I have listed, he was convicted of Dita's. And she was with an unidentified female who, unfortunately, to this day has never been identified. But the two of them were together when they were killed. And then you have some of these other crimes that he did confess to, but I don't know if he's confessed to like such brutality because the brutality was more recent to when he had been arrested, and most of those were convictions where he went to trial.
So you have an escalation of violence.
You absolutely do, yes.
And the women that we talked about so far in this case,
Mary Beth
and everybody,
yep,
they fill the gap of where there's missing victims, essentially, in this timeline.
And before the brutality really began.
Right. And you would have to assume that these women could fill that gap.
Yes, and then just thinking, we know that he's pled not guilty in Diane Cusick's case. We don't know what's going to come from that, but if it is found that he was definitely linked to that case, he was in Nassau County. Once we know that he might have been the person responsible there, then that is just more proof that he could have been involved in Mary Beth, Laverne, or Dorothy's, because again, they were all found in Nassau County.
Right.
I feel like this is the one case that we have covered so far, and you said it a couple episodes back, John, that there is going to be a case where it might be inevitable that a serial killer could have been responsible. And I feel like this is that case.
I feel out of everything that we've talked about so far, all the cases that we've done, this is the closest we've gotten to, and most likely found a connection to these women who went missing, found murdered, and fit in a timeline of a serial killer's years of activity almost perfectly.
Yeah, and it's just, I think the thing about him too is just the lack of an MO outside of strangulation. Yeah. Yes, a lot of these victims are quite similar in age. I think you're looking at anywhere from roughly 13 to 29 years old. I mean, it's definitely a range, but...
Yeah, but you have 13-year-olds that look 18 and you have 29-year-olds that look 20.
Like me. No, but yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, there are just so many similarities.
And you also have a guy that's claiming to have killed 85 to 100 women.
Absolutely.
And we have like 10 here on this list. So where are all the other missing ones?
And that's the thing that really got me is the closeness of when these all happened. Because you're only looking at several months in between some of these. Like when you're going from 1967 to 1969, you have like 4 months, 5 months in between each murder. And then when you move further on and you're looking at 78 to 80, I mean, even in 1980, the year that he's arrested, May 5th, May 12th, May 15th, May 22nd. I mean, he was literally one after the other after the other.
And something else to think about, we have Mary Beth and we have Laverne, who to us, even without talking about Cottingham, seem to be connected. But then you have authorities and investigators coming out and saying that Dorothy has no connection to these other two murders.
Yeah.
Then we have a serial killer active in the area at the time with essentially no MO.
Yep.
And Dorothy's death is closest to the time period with an escalation of violence.
Yes.
So if you have, some manner of death that's much more vicious and violent than Mary Beth's and Laverne's, which is what authorities are focusing in on, separating her case from the other two women.
But her case was also a year after both Mary Beth and Laverne, and only a year prior to Lorraine Kelly and Marianne Pryor, which was particularly brutal.
That's what I'm saying. So maybe authorities are like, oh, this is way more violent than these other two women are. And that's how they're saying, oh, no, it's not connected.
Yeah.
But that's also like the cutoff time period when things with Cottingham became particularly more brutal.
Absolutely, yeah.
So they all could very well be connected, and the time frame fits well.
Definitely. And there was one more thing that I wanted to mention, and it was this weird coincidence that I did not even realize until I started looking into Cottingham. So Jennifer Weiss and Dr. Vronsky helped to create this website called NewJerseyGirlMurders.com, which is actually a site that I came across when I was searching for a New Jersey case, and it's where I found Jan Cotta's case. And that was an episode we did a few months back, but apparently they created this site to put together all these cases and have them neatly organized, and then they would have the ability to bring those cases to Cottingham to see if, anything that he had said would connect to any of these crimes. Could they find any of these women based on little tidbits that he was giving? And then you can bring maybe a photo or more details to him after the fact once you have them all neatly compiled in this website. Well, I had no idea that it was these people that created this website that I had already found and utilized. So the thing that I wanted to bring up is that Cottingham never came up in my research on Jan Cotta's case. But John, I don't know if you noticed it specifically on this list of his victims, but there was one woman that was an attempted murder, and she was pregnant at the time. So, it didn't seem like Cottingham didn't discriminate against pregnant women. So we know Jan was pregnant at the time of her murder.
Yep.
Obviously, the whole situation with the baby in the mailbox in that case was absolutely wild. And obviously, we also know that the DNA supposedly didn't match. What if that was the strangest coincidence ever? And what if he had some connection to Jan Cotta?
I don't know. It's something to think about, but I'd have to go back and I'd have to look at Jan's case specifically because there were a lot of things where who she got picked up by and all that stuff. But who knows? If you found her case on this website created by these people, you never know.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. And you can even see, too, on that site, the NewJerseyGirlMurders.com, that they have Mary Beth Heinz listed. Then they have Laverne Moye listed. There was one other person in between, and then you have Dorothy's. And once I was, looking into this, and then I came back to that site, I was like, oh, my, there's just so many connections that I couldn't look away from.
Right.
And it's like, you have to talk about this person because there is totally the potential. And don't get me wrong, we could be completely off.
Right. Without a conviction or a confession.
Yeah.
They may not be connected, but there's a point where you have to come out and you have to say, hey, look at all these similarities. Look at this guy that was in the area at this time.
So I think overall, it's definitely possible that Cottingham could have been involved in Mary Beth, Laverne, or even Dorothy's cases. And I really just wish we knew more about the three of them. What other types of indications were there on their bodies that could maybe lead them back to Cottingham? Because we know in some instances, he had cut women and other things like that. And then, did investigators gather physical evidence that they weren't sure, back in the day, to be useful for DNA or anything like that? But have they taken that from their victims during that 67 to 80 time frame? Have they tested it? Have they put those things through CODIS? Have they come up with any matches and they're just trying to confirm certain things? And have any of those other potentially up to 8 confessions that Cottingham has given, were any of them about these 3 cases we've covered, and are authorities just trying to confirm for sure that he's connected?
Right, that was my question. Has anybody brought facts of these murders to him to try and get him to talk about them and essentially get a confession out of him for those?
Yeah, overall, it seems like they're doing their due diligence in the right way, where they're not releasing anything until they can confirm that if he's given a confession, that confession seems legitimate and they have other factors of the crime that they can then take and compare to him, and they're like, yep, okay, this seems like an accurate confession, not just one he's, pulling out of his ass and trying to just like play a game with us on.
Right, but this guy is also a difficult case when it comes to getting information out of him.
Oh, absolutely.
If he has truthfully murdered 85 to 100 women, and we only have, say 10 confessions or convictions on him, but you have to get him talking and reminiscing in order to get this information out, it's not like you can go in there with a list of 80 women and say,
yes,
this happened here, this is the manner of death, did you do it?
Yeah.
No. It's like you have to do this whole rigmarole to get him talking, and then hopefully say the right thing for him to go on a tangent and
give you something that he
information.
wouldn't have. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what these 3 people that are working with him have said, that, I mean, it's intensive work for them, and they're taking...
You can blow a whole case.
Absolutely.
By pushing him too hard.
Yes, for sure. And I think, they're just trying to take these little tidbits and literally just completely dissect every sentence this man speaks to find little things to then hopefully connect to any of the cases that you have. And there are so many. Nassau County alone said they had 13 cases from that time frame. But that he has all these other victims in all these other areas in New Jersey and New York. So how many other counties and how many other cases are there? There's probably dozens, if not hundreds, that they have to work through to hopefully try and connect him to.
And again, like we said before, time is of the essence with this. Guy's getting old now.
Yeah, and when he was arraigned for the indictment or whatever it was for Diane Cusick's case, he was in a hospital bed. He is not in great health. So you really are running out of time. And I'm sure, they're trying to get what they can, but you just never know.
Right.
You really don't. So I'm hoping that these other cases that there's DNA, and there were actually a couple comments from both the Nassau County DA and the detective captain of the Nassau County Homicide Squad. And this was from a Pix 11 article on these cases and the potential of Cottingham having involvement. And I wanted to read it for you. It states, quote, "We now have evidence he was here in Nassau County," Donnelly said, as she noted DNA was preserved from the 1968 crime scene and matched with Cottingham's genetic sample in a national database called CODIS. "We have upwards of 5 other cases we've submitted DNA on," said Detective Captain Stephen Fitzpatrick, commander of the Nassau County Police Homicide Squad, end quote. And the 1968 case, obviously, that they're talking about is Diane Cusick's. So we know that they submitted the DNA on that case, but they said they have upwards of 5 more in their county, which we know Mary Beth's, Laverne's, and potentially even Dorothy's are among those.
Right.
So are they one of the 5? I don't know.
Could be.
So I'll say with this case, I think it's very similar to last week's, where there's really no other theories out there. I mean, I think we've asked all the questions that we would ask. Sometimes it's redundant, in this conversational format. And I think we've, really gone through everything as best we can. But what I want to say to our listeners is I want to know what you think. This is the most in-depth I've ever gone into a serial killer. I'm sure there's so much more out there. I want to know what you guys know. I want to know, if you know anything more specific about any of these cases we've discussed or Cottingham in general, reach out to us. Like, I would love to have a dialogue here about these cases and this possible connection to Richard Cottingham.
And again, you can't reiterate it enough that all 3 of these murders that we covered, Mary Beth's, Laverne's, and Dorothy's, were so poorly publicized. Not to say that the investigations weren't taken seriously.
Yeah.
It's just the news didn't grasp them.
Well, I will say there was one comment that I read, and again, it's hard. I try and substantiate things with multiple other sources, but in instances like this, there's really not much that I can compare and contrast to. But I will say that there was a comment regarding Mary Beth's father and the fact that he was this New York City police officer, and a lot of their family felt as though it was like left up to him almost to like solve the case.
Oh, that's terrible.
So I wonder, what this investigation really was like back in 72 and, the early days. And if...
Which is all up to speculation.
Of course, yeah.
But what we do know as fact is that none of them were well reported on.
No, definitely not. And that's the thing that's just so unfortunate. I wish, that there was more information out there about Dorothy Anderson or who she was before her life was tragically taken. And then you have Laverne Moye, who left behind 2 young children who still don't know what happened to their mother. It is just so unfortunate. And back to where we started too, Mary Beth Heinz's case has been discussed, but we only know so much about her. Her sister told the Mineola American, quote, "Mary Beth was a person with epilepsy who suffered greatly because of it, but it never stopped her. She deserved the same great life as many of us have. Her life was cut short, and no one will give me any answers as to how or why or who." All 3 of these women deserve to be talked about, they deserve to have their cases covered, and they deserve justice. If you know anything about who killed Mary Beth Heinz, Laverne Moye, or Dorothy Anderson, please contact the Nassau County Police Department at 516-571-2120 or the Nassau County Police Department Homicide Division at 516-573-7788. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.